Jeffrey, what's up, man? I'm so glad you made some time to appear on the podcast today. This is gonna be a lot of fun.
I'm really glad to be here, Nate. Let's get started.
Yeah, let's. I love that attitude. So, but for anyone who doesn't is not familiar with you or your work and kind of the way that you've sort of trying to crack the health code, can you just give us a little bit of background on who you are, what led you to be in this position that you're in today?
Yeah, I mean, it'd be a long story. I'm trying to make it short. I just grew up, athletic and always involved in lots of sports, but also really fortunate enough to always be involved in nature. So my dad really took us to the mountains every weekend and did a lot of backpacking and camping, and always said, other people go to church, we go to nature where we can hear it the closest maybe and the clearest. And so after a lot of experiences in sports and just trying to optimize my own experience, I got into health and healing, body work, wellness, movement, and it all really started for me. Started doing psychedelics when I was 14 years old, alongside of sports and other things. And by the time I was 19, I brought some mushrooms that I'd grown in college home to my younger brother. And on my way out to the train station, my dad's like, "Hey, by the way, I found these mushrooms that you must have given your brother." And I was thinking, "Oh shit, what's going to happen right now?" And it turned out that instead of the train being on time, it was about 5 hours late. So I ended up having a 5 hour conversation about psychedelics and consciousness and all of that. And very interestingly, that led to that train ride as I was kind of like dozing off in and out. As I was coming back into awareness, I was aware that I was sitting at a table with people or something talking to me, and they said, "Everything you've experienced through psychedelics is available to every human through the most basic human functions." And I just said, "What?" And as soon as I had the what, the awareness of it, the volume went down, the voices were gone. So it was just some part of my inner consciousness talking to me, or however you want to slice it up. But I took that and I was like, what are the most basic human functions? And I started mapping it out and trying to create a model of what that looked like. And basically came up with this model that had presence in the middle, and then moving, breathing, sounding, resting, nourishing, hydrating. I was trying to figure out how to fit sex in there because that's a pretty big part of our human experience as well. But, sex is kind of a combination of multiple of those. So what I did was I just started going, okay, like I want to look into all of this, because the premise was all of us have access to way more intelligence, both inside of us and around us, than most of us have the opportunity to engage with, because of just the way normal life is and how we've been groomed and conditioned through the schooling and systems and etc. So my dad was one of those people who's like, "Oh, I'd love to try that and experience that, but there's risks involved, right?" And so it led me to start looking into these things. And really the things that popped up were these movement, breath work, sound work, and just started magnetizing teachers and experiences to myself, and quickly started taking trainings and to be able to teach and share these experiences with others. And that's what got me started.
Okay, that's a great story, and I like that. I like that you started looking at what are the things that humans have access to, even outside of psychedelics, that can kind of connect you to these healing patterns. And so, I started as a personal trainer in 2008, so I've been in like the training side of health for a really long period of time. So I'm super curious to know from your perspective, because you are a certified yoga teacher and trainer, as well as you have like a litany of other certifications and accolades behind your name. Lots of letters. Love that. But like, can you just give us like your philosophy on on movement and why the way that you see movement is actually impactful for not just physical health, but the mental health side of things and the disease prevention as well?
Yeah, I mean, that's a beautiful question, well articulated. What I think would be important to start with is the premise of the brain and nervous system and the effects of stress on it. So we have to, for me, it all had led back to understanding that no matter what I'm going to work with another, like whatever system in their being, I have to go to the highest level in that system to make the greatest impact. So most systems work from above down, inside out. The brain and nervous system are one that fits that model really well. Obviously, the system works from the brain down the spinal column and out through the nerve junctions into the body and vital organs. So if I were to, let's just say on a symptomatic level, if someone's having symptom, a rib cage thing or a shoulder thing, I could work out here, but the further in toward the core, the center of that system, and the higher up in the system I go, the less output on my part do I have to create in order to create the biggest impact in their system. So movement is so important because stress impacts us in this way. We were groomed here on planet Earth for many millions of years to have a very simple stress response, which is there's a threat. I go into that response. My brain lateralizes and goes into the hindbrain, a more primitive level of function that moves bigger neurons faster so it can control my body and take over to keep me alive, right? Survival mode. It moves the blood flow, glucose, and oxygen out to the limbs. It moves my locus of perception to the amygdala. And in that amygdala, I'm seeing clearly through a predator prey games lens. So now I'm ready to survive, right? But those survival situations were very short lived in primitive times. We quickly got to know whether we made it or not. And when we made it, now it's over. The brain could shift back into that more human level of function. It comes back into balance. Blood flow, glucose, and oxygen goes back to the viscera, and body goes back into parasympathetic or that bridge, like alpha waves, where we're between the two, ready to respond. Either we need to pick it up and respond to some threat, or we can slow down and rest and digest. So understanding that level of how our brains work, modern stress is triggering the same simple primitive stress response. But because the way stressors work these days with many beginnings and no ending, what's happening is people are locked into a chronic stress state. And since it's a brain lateralization, what that means is that it always picks one hemisphere. And in reflection of that one hemisphere dominance, we always get a level of excessive tension on one side of the body and power distribution to ward off or defend or guard, right, or run. And we get excessive weakness and loss of tone on the other. So movement systems are really important to, especially movement systems that work on the core of the body. So I focus mostly on spinal stuff that gets the spine both flexible, supple, and powerful and ready to respond, but not already in a response. We cross the midline since the left hemisphere of the brain controls the right side of the body and right hemisphere controls the left side of the body. If I can move my limbs and cross my midlines repeatedly, I get an effect of getting cross-modal communication. So those two hemispheres are forced to talk across the corpus callosum. And when they do that, they start to go, oh, they start to share information and data, and they're going, oh, wait, maybe there isn't a threat. So we get a stabilization of brainwaves slowing down and activity in both hemispheres of the brain, which is going to have all sorts of exponential results in the body, unlike, just like working out my biceps or something, right? So I try to work at the core as much as I can.
Okay, there's a lot to unpack there.
Yeah.
First of all, when you're talking about this sympathetic nervous system response, that fight or flight,
Yeah.
are you saying that like the left side of my body will get a lot more of that or like the front side, or like, kind of will get a lot more of like the strength, and the right side will literally get weaker? Is it can it be that simplistic?
Yeah. So it's what in the work that I do, I test people before and after everything I do, and it's a simple stress test we call teaching through testing, because I'm ultimately teaching you how your nervous system works through testing it. And so, as we know, the brain is talking to the body. It's both communicating messages and receiving information. And so I can lay someone down on the table, for instance, or on the floor, and I can see the musculoskeletal distortion. So since if I have dominance in my left hemisphere, I'm going to see a distortion in the body. And typically this hemisphere controls this side. So I'll see excessive tension here, just like I'm in a fighter's position, right? Ready to guard, ready to go. And so, yes, if you were in your right hemisphere, your left side would have excessive tension. That's the first stage of imbalance. And we have a system where we have 8 stages of balance, 4 being in balance, 4 being out of balance. And the further stage 1 is having like no pain or discomfort when you're palpated, no tension, and you're really full life expression. So measurably, when I go to test resistance or power in each of your limbs, your response time is right there. You can meet me and you have like undescribable power without effort. And then as you get into a stress response, you're actually out of balance and you have that lateralization. So now, like palpating your neck, for instance, it's gonna be painful and tense and ropey and cordy tissue on both sides. You'll have one side that is higher than the other, both hip and shoulder, and the power will be on typically that same side. The further or the more stressed someone is, the longer they've been in it, the more degeneration that's occurred. You might see variations of that pattern as they go deeper into out of balance or stress.
Wow, I can't keep but put myself in this situation and be like, oh, I wonder what's going on with my right side of my brain, with my left side is always the problem side. So
Well,
this is something I've never heard this before. This is really interesting.
Yeah, it's been around for it was this whole system was kind of discovered almost 100 years ago by a certain guy, and it's kept in his family for three generations. And I've sort of received that lineage and am working to research and develop it further and spread it. So I run programs every year and teach practitioners of how to interface with people. And we work with all the best ultra marathon runners, Olympic athletes, weightlifters, all sorts of people, because measurably your body can come into way greater coherence and balance, and measurably way more powerful strong limbs, and all response time increases hugely.
So you're
In
saying basically like instead of approaching it from like a I want stronger arms, I need to work on my biceps. If you can go work on the brain and actually get your brain to interact with your central nervous system in a capacity where the central nervous system is now stress free and is not putting like a governor on your muscles, you are going to get a way better response and a way more effective building of strength than just simply training biceps.
Absolutely. And it doesn't mean training biceps should be off the table. It just means that this would be your first move, is get yourself into a greater level of measurable balance and power, then work the biceps, and then do it again afterwards, because a lot of our workouts that we do actually leave us in a stress response too. So, and some of the best workouts, like we've got a workout we've designed that's like isometric and isotonic resistance, and someone's working partnering with you, and you go all in like it's life or death. We call it a stress flush workout, because think about, like, most people have been chronically in a stress state for potentially decades. So they have all these stress hormones running through them. And so even if we can get them back into balance, or even if you meditate, or whatever the things you do to get yourself more balanced, you still have those hormones and the degenerative effects and corrosive effects of those hormones being in your body. So we do is we take each muscle group, and for about 10 or 15 seconds, we have people work to the max, like they are in a life or death situation, and they push. So we do this work called the alignment, bring them into balance, and then we take them through the most exertion they can in short bursts through each muscle group, and then reset them one more time. And you only have to work out once or twice a week, and you get huge results throughout your whole body.
That's really, really interesting. So I know that like a lot of times I'm prescribing workouts for people. I do the training and nutrition coaching as well. And I know that most often the people that I'm working with are parents, they're entrepreneurs, they're business owners. They are high stress individuals, between work, life, commute, all the things.
Yeah.
And then I also know on top of that, we're adding in training, right? And training, I think, can be a stress reliever, but it's also going to give your body, like you said, the stress response
Mm-hmm.
in order to be able to adapt and overcome that in the next time. How do you make training a more give it the calming effect and give it the ability to let keep it from accumulating additional stressors when we're going through that process, especially as like guys who want to work out 4, 5, 6 days per week.
Yeah. I mean, it can be a big stress release too, to do certain workouts, of course. And then there's all the other, yogic and other practices that you can do that can also be stress releasing or stress relieving. But I think one of the things that I work with when I work with clients or groups, it's like the first thing we look at is like, how's your rest? Right. So before I say, hey, I want you to jump in and do these workouts, I want to establish the routines of how you're resting, how you're sleeping, how normalized is that? How much are you getting? What's the quality of it? Because if I know you've got that, then adding a workout or something that may be stressful is going to be that much more effective, because I know you've got something set up that's allowing you to recover, right? Allowing you to rejuvenate from the exertion of a workout.
Gotcha. Okay. Fascinating.
Yeah.
So,
And there's
so how,
tools for that, like I was going to say, like some of the things we use is like these things, a biomat, which is like an infrared personal sauna, things that this one particularly, if you just lay down and breathe on it, it'll put you into a delta brainwave state in 7 to 10 minutes. So there's certain things that we can use to, like, as an auxiliary to help you get into a deeper rest quicker, and then therefore recover. Because a lot of people, especially if you're stressed, that's part of the problem, is that the sleep cycle is so disrupted and the brain is idling in that low beta, and it's like dipping in to those deeper rest cycles, but it's not staying long because it's vigilant, right? The brain's going, hey, well, I'm still in a threat here. My life might be on the line. How deep can I rest right now? So part of that is figuring out how to get the autonomic nervous system to reset, because then the quality of the rest goes through the roof. And everything else starts to change as well.
If someone's got like a biometric tracker, like an Aura Ring, a Whoop, Apple Watch, or something like that, what should they be on the lookout for to determine that they're actually not getting good rest? Because you mentioned alpha, delta, and beta brain waves.
Yeah.
What are some of like the kind of corresponding data points and those those kind of home biomarkers we have?
Yeah, I mean, you're looking for, you can see on those tools that they do show you kind of the depth of rest, and they call it REM sleep and things like that. I mean, you're looking for how long can you stay in one of those deeper rest cycles. Each of those devices shows it a little differently. I mean, one of the things back to the brain waves is like we've normalized beta, and this is one of the challenges we have with science is that we look at data and then we go, well, we took this big pool of data, and since this is what we see as the median, we call it normal. And I challenge
Mm.
that notion big time, because just because everyone that we test is in beta all day long and all night predominantly doesn't mean that's normal or good for us. So part of our biggest things is like, no matter what you're doing, if you have a way to measure that you can get your brain waves to slow, it's kind of like brain waves and brain activity and metabolic activity are like a teeter totter. So the high brain waves show me that you've got lower metabolic activity and proficiency and effectiveness. And then as your brain slows down at night, it's supposed to slow down naturally and your metabolic activity goes up. So all your digestion, your repair, etc. So people who are chronically in a stress state, that's the root of why their symptoms show up or their dis-ease eventually shows up. And stress is that causal level of disease, because it's because we're chronically in a stress state that all of these processes and all of these vital systems, the immune system, digestive system, tissue repair, and cell replication, all get behind. And the longer they're behind, the more they derange, the more toxins and things load up in the body, because the brain is still going, hey, well, when's that bear going to go away? Right? So what we're looking to do, if you want to make the biggest effect, is start to look at how can I reduce the effects? How can I do any sort of pattern interrupt? Something that's going to create that sort of, whoa, I got to reset and take a look. I call it like a portal into the present. How do you create a portal into the present moment where your brain is actually responding to what's happening now and not still responding to something from yesterday or last week or 10 years ago?
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit more about that and like how you can actually create that in the moment? Or how do you
Well,
even identify that you're in the moment? I know a lot of us are just living day to day, moment to moment in like a high stress state.
yeah.
Yeah. Where do we go from there?
Well, I mean, that's where the certain type of movement. So, one, the hands-on process that I teach is called alpha biotics, and it's what happens is right here on the back of the head. So behind the condyle, on the outer edge of the occiput, on each side, is the main nerve ganglion for the sympathetic nervous system. So, turns out this isn't new in some ways. There's evidence that the Egyptian culture had this priest would do this thing and take your hand on the back of your head and just do an upward motion. So that's a stimulus, right? So the brain is a stimulus response system. So what we need in order to, let's just give you a metaphor of what puts us in a stress response. Okay, so I'm driving down the road and let's just say I get T-boned, boom, and don't see it coming. That is a great reason to go into stress response. And what would happen is if the accident, if I get hit from the right, my brain lateralizes function away from the predator, right, or the cause of that stressor, and then it allocates blood flow, glucose, and oxygen to the side that the attack is coming from to flex so I can guard myself. And in doing so, I've got this whole physiological cascade of events. Now, once the accident's over, like I could end up in the hospital. And all those situations could be more and more stressful. So what we have to do is figure out a way to create a stimulus that is high sensory but non-threatening. So what puts us into the deepest stress states are high sensory threatening inputs. What brings us out are high sensory non-threatening inputs. So this work called alpha biotics, it offers a high sensory non-threatening input to that main nerve ganglion on each side. And we first focus on the hemisphere of the brain that seems to be turned off based on our testing. And by sending that stimulus, what our studies show and what the EEG shows is that in zero point 0.4 seconds, I mean, we are sitting in a Ferrari, right? This thing has a quantum computer. And 0.4 seconds from the stimulus, it's the body and brain have already scanned the body and environment and realized there's no bear attacking you. and reset down to the brainstem and turn back on into both hemispheres, landing in alpha and theta waves predominantly in the prefrontal cortex. So now you're in a human level of function, and you're able to, one, more respond objectively to the present moment instead of being in a response already to something in the past. You tracking?
Yeah, barely, but yes.
Okay. Yeah. So one of those things is like, well, I mean, we talked a little bit about psychedelics, and that something like DMT, right, is like that's a pattern interrupt. We just had the
Would you call that?
opportunity.
Would you call that high sensory, low threat?
Yeah, I mean, depends on your set and setting, right? You have to go. It's like if I'm at a festival and I do that, my brain, even if I tell myself I'm safe, might not think that that's safe. But if I'm in a safe container with somebody who has the skill set and and tools to assist me through whatever I might go through, then yes, it could be a high sensory, non-threatening input. But again, it's like we're a little bit, we're stretching the parameters because we don't know what our brain's going to perceive as threatening. But
That's a good point.
just recently, I was able to hook some people up on EEG equipment and see what DMT does in real time. And so in that, we
Fascinating.
saw that the person started with left hemisphere, mostly limbic system function, higher levels of beta waves, a little bit of alpha and some gamma. And then upon intake, within a few minutes, we saw a blackout. So basically, those brainwave activities, and so what brainwave activities is for your audience, real quick, to just give them an idea of what this is like. In order to say there's alpha waves going on, it means you have neurons that are actively firing at a certain hertz frequency. That means a certain number of cycles per second, and you have to have a bunch of them doing that activity for it to be readable by EEG, which is in electroencephalogram testing, where you hook up some sensors to the brain. You can see what's going on. So you're kind of looking for the patterns of activity and where are things happening. So this person is beta, and beta is an outer reactive. It's associated with stress, with being on the go, like your pedals to the metal, you're going. And so this person was in that state. The DMT went into their system, and over a couple minutes, we saw a blackout. And that means just instead of there being like enough activity in any wave form, there wasn't enough to be readable. And then we started seeing these bursts of gamma in the prefrontal cortex. So left, right, left, left, right. It was really interesting, and correlated it to this person having insight, like little revelations about, oh my gosh, like I'm taking that too seriously. Oh my gosh, like believing myself in this, just levels of release out of their own matrix, their own made matrix of stories, etc. So as they came back on, their brainwaves had changed. I mean, come back out of the DMT experience had changed. So pattern interrupts can be hard to come by. Most of them are slower, meaning like sitting in meditation is a pattern interrupt because you're stopping from the normal activity, right? Going into a yoga class could be a pattern interrupt. Going on a walk could be a pattern interrupt if you've been at work or at the desk all day. It's like looking at what is the norm for you, the thing that you normally fill your days with, and the patterns you've been in, and just throwing something different in there. One of my favorite ones is just put the frickin' toothbrush on the other side of the sink, because it's like you go in the morning and you'll see how automated you are, because you go in and you reach for the toothbrush and you're like, oh, it's not there. So it's trying to give your audience an idea of like, there's some real simple ways to do this without anybody else. It's just like literally throw yourself curveballs, because that's what gets you to come back into the moment.
I saw someone say the other day that like we are so obsessed with being productive, but it's really the unproductive time of like taking a walk, being in nature, learning an instrument, looking through old photos, things that don't necessarily seem like they're moving the needle, or that hustle culture, that are really that give us the biggest like return on our investment. That person went
Absolutely.
on to like say basically like spend more of your time doing unproductive things and you'll be happier for it.
Yeah, I mean, I think Tim Ferriss is kind of popular for that notion itself, which is like the unprogrammed time in your life. It's so important to create rest cycles. Whether it's your personal practices, your time alone, I calendar those things into my life. Otherwise, they won't happen. If I put it, it's like, hey, this day is just, I do 3 days a month. I call them snow days, which is just like days where I'm like, oh, I guess I'm not seeing clients, I'm not taking calls. I'm just going to go to the river or be outside or lay in bed. And it is those days. It's strangely enough, it's often those days that I make the most money, that I have the most insights, that lead to bigger changes in my life, or the problems I've been trying to solve in my organization. All of a sudden, why didn't I think of that? It's like, it's those sort of things that happen when you just stop. And
Mm.
that comes into, the inner yin and yang, or the inner masculine and feminine that each of us has, whether we're showing masculine or feminine on the surface. We have those energies, and they have to be balanced all the time. And that unstructured unknown is a much more feminine aspect of ourselves to just lean into. And most of us don't do it. We definitely live in a male dominant society that's like, what are you going
We
to get done
glorify
today?
it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And glorify it by how many things we got done, and how I didn't sleep, and I kept going, and I pushed through this, and I did that. I did that for a long time, and it almost cost me my life, and definitely cost me my marriage and lots of other things by just pushing it, burning it at both ends, and taking care of everyone but me, even though I knew how to take care of myself. And then I would push it and be like, well, it's 2 a.m. I'll take care of myself now for an hour, and I got kids and, all the things. And I'd sit in like the bathroom reading and writing and doing my practice at 3 a.m. or something. And it's like, but my body ultimately was like, no, that's not sustainable.
Yeah. And your body will let you know how what it thinks of your behaviors. And if you're not listening, it'll let you know in a bad way later down the road, right?
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about that? You mentioned stress as kind of being the root of a lot of these diseases you see, but can you talk a bit about like the neurophysiological impact beyond the symptoms and how that is linked to disease?
Absolutely. Yeah. So first and foremost, like I mentioned before, the stress state is meant to keep us alive. And one of the things, even this word alpha biotics that this guy came up with for the work that we do, if you break it down in if you look at the root meanings, it means life first. And so what we're dealing with is organisms want to live. So that's part of our nature, right? We want to live, we want to survive. So when we have a stress response, that response is meant to move us through something that could be impacting our ability to survive. So it's going to be priority. And it's going to trump all of those other processes in the body. All the other things that need to get done are going to go on the back burner because, hey, my life might be on the line right now. So stress is brilliant in that way, because if I am fighting a tiger or a bear, you better believe I want my glucose and blood flow and oxygen going to my limbs, because then I could frickin', beat it or run from it, or at least fend myself and, freeze and play dead, or maybe even look cute. Like all those things, that the four options of the limbic system, as I call them, those are what are available. The problem with that is that when that part of our brain takes over, it pulls all of the resources from those vital systems. And part of the hormonal cascade or physiology of stress is adrenaline, right? Or norepinephrine, if we're actually in the experience. If I'm actually in the fight, you better believe I want those things coursing through my body, because they give me superpowers. But when I think I'm threatened and the threat just doesn't seem to show up, what do I pump out is cortisol. And so down in my liver, this beautiful organ that I have, which is named very aptly liver, it's so important for us to live because it's doing like 25,000 functions a second. And it's producing pregnenolone, which is then going to be the hormone that we build all of our yummy serotonin and DHA and DHEA and vitamin D and all those things that allow us like the lovely consciousness that we have as human beings. Well, my liver is going to reroute all of that to start creating cortisol. And cortisol is going to basically numb me out, preparing me for battle. Like, okay, well, when the battle comes, I'll be ready. And so it's this preparatory thing. But the hormones that come with stress they are corrosive. So they're going to start breaking you down because they're more acidic and they're binding the alkaline organs of the liver and pancreas from doing what they do naturally. So then the food that we put in our mouth gets bathed in the acid bath. And when it's trying to drop into the duodenum, it doesn't have enough alkaline to balance it out before it goes into our intestines. So then we've got digestive disorders, right? It's just the cascade of events that keeps going. All of our processes are put on the back burner. So again, our immune system isn't working properly because it doesn't have the energy to do it. The brain's rerouted that energy. The digestive system doesn't have the energy to do what it needs to do. Tissue repair is not happening as effectively. Our cell replication starts to get deranged. So all of these things over time accumulate based on your epigenetic tendency. So if you were around a lot of resentment, you might be a gallbladder person. If you were around a lot of fear, you might be a kidney person. These are total generalized, ideas, but that where in your body might you start loading the toxins. And as those get loaded up, the body also is trying to distance themselves from it because we are an alkaline wet cell battery. So look at every battery package on the planet, right? It says alkaline. If we lose our alkalinity, we're dead. So the more we get us acidic from not keeping up, the body creates alkaline buffers, which is a part of the stress response as well, which then is like trying to keep our blood pH the right so we can stay alive. Meanwhile, we're loading up a cesspool that is eventually going to have to be dealt with. And eventually the body does allow for biofilms and cofactors to be created around things, which was, called cancer or other Neolithic diseases. And those things get allowed, then you let in the undertakers. So then yeast, mold, and fungus and their derivatives all start to try to help you break those things down because they're the only things that can break those toxins down without the proper enzyme and bile releases from your body, gut, and your brain being able to say, hey, we need to make this stuff, but we can't be doing that when we're stressed. So ultimately, it's these things, these down the line cascade events from stress, from long-term stress, that create disease. And then that same thing that we've now allowed, those yeast, mold, and fungus or cancer or whatever you want to call it, to take over, often they get out of control. And then we lose control of our body and something foreign is now running the show. And we've all lost loved ones from that. And it's terrible.
Wow. Um, when you said the title, like you said, "Let in the Undertaker," are you referring to yeast, mold, and fungus? Or kind of like you're calling that the
Yeah.
Undertaker?
Yeah. Those are the undertakers. I mean, you look at any biological process and, those are dysbiotic organisms. And that
Mm-hmm.
means is that they're there to disassemble, they're to break
Mm-hmm.
things down. So we have this metabolic activity, right? And there's the anabolic things that build us up, and there's the catabolic things that break us down. So yeast, mold, and fungus are part of that. They break things down, and we have to have a balance between those two forces in our life. Otherwise, we cease to exist eventually, and sooner than later.
Are those what's are coming in to break down the alkaline buffers we've created as a response to the high cortisol levels? Is that
Break down the toxins. So, say
okay?
it's like most toxins are acidic and they're positively charged and they're heavy. So, like heavy metals, it means they have a lot of charge. And what that means, so we are that wet free cell or alkaline battery is running on electrons, and electrons are, if you heard of free electrons, right? Free electrons are basically antioxidants. So let's just talk about real quick what antioxidants are. Oxidation is the process of, like, let's say oxygen is supposed to have 8 electrons. When something like a heavy metal moves through and robs one of those electrons, now that thing that was oxygen becomes a free radical. And it's now scouring your body to rob charge from something else. And in doing so, that causes a lot of damage in our body. So in order to stay alive and vital, we want to do things that increase our own electrons and how many spare electrons we have in our body. I think you did one recently on hydrogen, and that's kind of the science behind hydrogen and why it's so effective is it's able to carry a bunch of free electrons, and those are donatable. And we're sitting in a vacuum, and so we have energies coming in from above and energies coming in from below, and more subtle than our actual nervous system, but that are interacting with our nervous system. And as those waves crash together, they actually pull electrons into your field. And then that's what helps you be vital and resilient, is the ability to meet something toxic or something heavy, like a heavy metal, and actually just feed it electrons so that it can go away, right? Rather than
Yeah.
have a toxic effect on us.
Okay. So what's your opinion then on like exogenous hydrogen, like the hydrogen water, the hydrogen tablets? You
Yeah,
use
I mean, I've
that? Del-
I've tinkered around with them for 20 years or more. Patrick Flanagan was one of my friends from a long time ago, and he invented some really interesting hydrogen stuff and got involved with those electrolyzer stuff along with water electrolyzers a long time ago too. I think there is quite a bit of value in it. Um, I think there's like a place for it. Like I'm bigger fan of spring water if you can get it, but if you can drink 1 cup of hydrogen alkaline water a day at the right time, it could be extremely beneficial. It's just not something you, because we're breaking things down with acids in our body, you have to be careful of when you intake those highly alkaline things.
oh, what's the right time? It depends on each person.
Well, right before bed is a great time, actually.
Okay.
Do
Giving
that.
your body some more of that, the
Yeah.
antioxidants to process. And like you said, kind of with the metabolic functions versus
Yeah.
like the
Yep.
brainwave functions. Okay.
Exactly. You're going to increase metabolic activity. You're not going to put anything else in your mouth to digest. So it's a great time to go ahead and send a bunch of free electrons through your body.
Okay. Great. Yeah. We had someone on who was talking a lot about hydrogen water. And it sounds like one of those things that's too good to be true. So
Yeah.
very, very curious to hear your opinion on that. Can you talk a little bit, Jeffrey, about breath work? How does breath work play into this? You mentioned kind of like using, meditation, yoga, something I would assume breath work as well as like a pattern interrupt for your day. How else does that play into the reduction of stress, cortisol, and eventually disease?
Well, it's huge because if you think about breath and you watch someone work out, right, when they're really stressed or trying to push something up, right, their breath changes. You can see it. They either hold their breath or it's like there's. So what I say is that for every state, there's a breath for that. And so if you're in a stress state, you're most likely not consciously breathing with awareness, and nor are you likely breathing very deeply unless you're like exerting, there's different types of stress. Like I could be doing a run or something and breathing very consciously and deeply. But it can be a pattern interrupt as well. So back to those simple things we can do, you can at any time be like, wow, I haven't actually thought about my breath in a while, and just take a slow, deep breath. And that could have a pattern interrupt effect for you. And those forces we talked about, like the yin and yang forces in our life and our body, or the forces that build us up, the forces that break us down, we're taking in so much with each of our breaths. We're exchanging with the field. And in doing so, there's more to our breath than oxygen. Of course, there's all the energetic and electronic components to it. There's gaseous nutrients in the air. There's ions and electrons that we're exchanging. So it's very important for us to find balance between our inhale and exhale. I do a lot of breath that works to create release, so kind of cathartic release, and then train people on how to um, step into breath practices that are more regulatory. So helping keep the nervous system balanced and calm, but interspersed in that, like maybe at a weekly interval, we do something where you use breath to, you basically fill the body, you bring in so much breath that it starts to surface the things that are stuck. So if
Mm.
breath is this energy that's coming in, it's new life, it's the moment coming in. Eventually, if you bring enough of the moment in, it's going to lift up the past, and whatever that could be. It could be memories, it could be traumas, it could be stories, it could be pains. But the idea of being able to live fully vital here and now is that we have to come to resolution with the things that have caused us the most stress. They've been the most violating, or created the biggest voids in our life. Like the sooner we can interface with those in a safe and potent environment, breath is one of the best tools to do that. I like breath and I like voice. So it's like getting someone to breathe and breathe and breathe and breathe until their body's just fully alive. I mean, it's humming and buzzing and flowing, and it's felt like you can feel life moving in you. And that's a pretty profound thing to experience. And when life is moving through you, it often has the tendency to lift things up that are not so alive anymore, right? That may be stuck, and that you may have been revolving your life or your story or your perceptions around, but it's actually ready to move. And so in a sense, you're invigorating, you're bringing life in, and you're accessing things that have been needing to be felt, like you have to feel it to heal it kind of thing. And so people often have big cathartic experiences, meaning that they come into a emotional contact or a feeling contact or a mental contact with something that they've been kind of like suppressing or that's been oppressed in them. And in moving that, there's huge opportunity for growth, and there's huge opportunity to see yourself, your life, your circumstances from a different perspective. And that's often kind of that 2020 hindsight where you're like, wow, this thing that I didn't enjoy and hurt me so much, and I wished and wished and wished never happened to me. Once you come into contact with it through this type of breathing, it actually, you start to look at it and go, oh my gosh, I couldn't actually be me, and seeing the way I see and sharing the gifts I have without having had that. So now you love and appreciate that thing that happened that before you resented and despised. And that's a key to our well-being, because we are beings of perception. So we're perceivers first and foremost. And the nature of perception, per, is to pair, is to split. So right out the gate, we have a disadvantage because our mind wants to divide, right, and break things up. And all of the great teachings of the past that the great sages have left us have all said, but hey, everything's perfect. It's all whole, balanced, and complete as it is. So if I'm experiencing that it isn't, then that's inside of me. And I need to do the work to re-perceive until I can see the upsides of what I only saw downsides for, or see the downsides of what I only saw upsides for. So I can break both out of resentments and despisings and infatuations and fantasies, and actually come more into this moment where I can be effective and actually maybe make a difference.
My last experience with breath work was similar to that. I mean, I've tried to do like, I do like some of the Wim Hof breathing in the morning, but less as like a cathartic release and more of like kind of the pattern interrupt and a way to start my day. But I did like a guided breathwork session, and I think it was probably 90 minutes or so. I just started sobbing, and I realized there was I was holding on to some pain, and I had not forgiven the person.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a really powerful way for me to like kind of move past that, actually have a conversation, offer my forgiveness for something that I didn't even realize was an issue for me.
Right.
And that was like, I think that was very like healing for the relationship. So
Hugely. That's
yeah.
exactly what I'm talking about, is like breath has this incredible capacity to just, it's life, right? And so as life is moving through us and we just keep staying with it, it's so simple. I've had more and more, like 1,000 people go, how did that happen? All I did was breathe. Like, what? That doesn't make any sense. And of course it doesn't make any sense to your rational mind. But when you move that energy through, and like you said, there was something in you that you didn't even realize was necessarily there, or if it wasn't causing a problem. And then to be able to be with it, that's the other beautiful aspect of the body and life, is that uh, things like breath there's an intelligence to the body, and the interaction between it and the life force around it, and the breath is that interface. And so the thing that needs to come up and that you're ready to resolve comes up. It's not like you're just going in willy-nilly and you don't know what's going to happen. But what I found in doing thousands and thousands and thousands of these sessions over the last 20 plus years is that people get what they're ready for. That there's that kind of intelligence somehow in it, that what comes up sometimes in the moment, people are like, I don't want to deal with this, but then ultimately they move into it because the breath won't really back down unless you just stop. And then there's other effects to that. But that when engaging with it, they actually find that, wow, that was so profound, and it unlocked something that I didn't even realize was stuck. And that's
Wow.
beautiful.
Mm-hmm. So Jeffrey, I could talk to you for another like 4 or 5 hours if you had the time today, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
But one thing that you had offered to everybody, if they wanted to learn a little bit more, would be that that neurohacking stress to restore your vitality workshop you put on.
Yeah.
So you can go to www.haveahappyspine.com to check that out. What's is that going to talk a lot about what we've spoken about today, kind of like the breath, the movement, those sorts of pieces, or is there a place that people can go to learn more about that?
Yeah, well, one, it will. I mean, you'll learn a lot about stress and its effects and how the brain nervous system work and how movement can interface. And then there's a little movement workshop at the end of it. So you'll get some practicals that you can utilize every day. And then you can check out my other websites, which are vitalistproject.com and lifestylesoflight.com. So one of those is my service center where I offer, my services and clients. And then the other is more of like, as I'm traveling and teaching and offering retreats and trainings, you can find me there.
That's awesome. Man, it has been an absolute pleasure getting a chance to chat with you. And I feel like this turned into me asking you questions and lightly disguising them as interview questions. So, so full
I know that.
transparency on that.
Yeah, that time went by. I was like, shoot, what? How did that happen?
That's cool. I normally don't feel like I look up and like, oh, 45 minutes has gone by. So that's pretty crazy.
We wore
But
time
any,
together. Thank you.
yeah, any like anything you want to leave us with? Any like anything else you feel like is important to say?
I mean, just the simple thing is just get outside. Your body was totally evolved for this place we call Earth. So get outside into natural places because that's a pattern interrupt too. And something about those places and spaces and the sounds you hear and the things you see and the colors and all that have such profound effects that we can so easily overlook in our modern day because we're looking at these screens with all this blue light and all this stuff that has so many physiological effects that just get outside as often as you can, create those pattern interrupts for yourself, and never lose hope that your body isn't brilliant. Your body is. Your body is so brilliant and so much wisdom inside of it. And I think there's a huge opportunity for all of us to trust it a little bit more and to get into these simple things that we already do, right? Like we can't live without breathing. So why not give breath a little more attention? And we may get huge results from that. And we can't really live long without moving. So why not move our bodies with a little more awareness? Things like that, I think, are just simple, but I know give results every time.
Love that. I think that's so profound and so wise. I think I'm also going to steal your concept of a snow day. Be like, tell my
Yes.
wife, hey, I got to go to the mountains today. It's
Yep.
important. Jeffrey told me to. I had to. So
Yeah, if you put her in touch, I'll let her know.
awesome, man. Really appreciate you taking the time to chat with us today. You're the best.
Yeah, thanks, Nate. You're awesome.